There's someone at every birthday party who quietly steps to the side when the cake comes out, not because they're unhappy, not because they don't care, but because the moment everyone turns to look at them, something inside them just tightens. If that's you, you already know exactly what I mean. And today, science finally has some answers for why your brain works this way. Because here's what nobody tells you. Hating the spotlight isn't shyness, it isn't low confidence, it isn't a fear you need to fix, it's a deeply wired psychological pattern that affects more people than you think. And understanding it might just change how you see yourself completely. Let's start with what's actually happening in your brain when attention shifts toward you. Most people assume it's anxiety, and sometimes it is, but researchers have found something more specific going on. When someone who hates being the center of attention suddenly becomes the focus of a room, their brain triggers what's called the social evaluative threat response. It's the same neurological alarm system that fired in your ancestors when the tribe was watching them. Because back then, being watched meant being judged. Being judged meant potential rejection, and rejection from the tribe meant death. Your brain hasn't fully gotten the memo that a birthday song is not a survival situation. Here's where it gets interesting. This response varies enormously between people, and the difference comes down to something called the behavioral inhibition system, or BIS. Some brains have a highly sensitive BIS. When they detect potential social scrutiny, the system slams the brakes, heartbeat spikes, thoughts scatter. The urge to disappear becomes overwhelming. Other brains have a much quieter BIS. They barely register being watched. They might even enjoy it. This isn't a character flaw, it's neurological wiring, and research suggests it's partly genetic. You didn't choose this, you inherited it. But there's more happening than just genetics, because personality plays a massive role here too. People who hate the spotlight tend to score extremely high in a trait called self-monitoring. And this sounds like a good thing, right? Being aware of yourself? But in high doses, self-monitoring becomes exhausting. These people are constantly running an internal simulation of how they appear to others. When attention hits them, that simulation goes into overdrive. They're simultaneously trying to respond naturally while analyzing every micro-expression on every face watching them. It's like trying to have a conversation while also directing a film about yourself, in real time, with no script. And here's the part that surprises most people. This is not the same as low self-esteem. Research from the University of Michigan found that many people who strongly dislike being the center of attention actually have quite healthy self-concepts. They know who they are. They like who they are. They just don't feel the need to perform that identity for an audience. There's a difference between confidence and visibility, and most people confuse the two. The person quietly holding the wall at a party isn't insecure. They might just be someone who knows that their value doesn't require a spotlight to exist. Let's go deeper. Because there's a fascinating concept in psychology called audience anxiety that explains a lot here. It's not about being around people, it's about being watched by people. Big difference. Someone who hates the center of attention can thrive in a crowded room as long as they're not the focal point. They can laugh loudly, tell stories, be genuinely warm and engaged. But the second someone says, "Hey everyone, listen to what she did," something shifts. The attention becomes a physical weight, and the only instinct is to deflect, minimize, redirect. Sound familiar? Psychologists have found that this deflection behavior is actually a sophisticated social skill. People who hate the spotlight become experts at redirecting attention. They ask great questions. They highlight others. They become the people who make everyone else feel interesting. And that's not a coping mechanism, that's a superpower. Research consistently shows that people who focus outward, who make others feel seen and heard, are rated as more likable, more trustworthy, and more influential than people who command the room. But let's be honest about something, because there's a darker side to this too. For some people, hating the spotlight isn't just a personality preference, it's armor. Maybe they grew up being embarrassed publicly. A parent who mocked them in front of others, a classroom where wrong answers became entertainment, a moment that taught them that visibility equals vulnerability. And now, the avoidance of attention is less about preference and more about protection. The brain learned that being seen can hurt, and it never fully forgot. If that resonates, it's worth sitting with, because there's a difference between someone who prefers the background and someone who hides there out of old fear. One is a genuine personality orientation. The other is an unhealed wound that deserves attention, not to fix you, but to free you. Now, here's something that researchers find genuinely fascinating about this group of people. They tend to process experiences more deeply than average. A concept called sensory processing sensitivity, studied extensively by psychologist Elaine Aron, describes people whose nervous systems take in and process information at a much more intense level. They notice things others miss. They feel things more acutely. They think in layers. And for these people, being the center of attention is overwhelming, not because they're weak, but because they're receiving too much input at once. Every eye on them is data. Every reaction is information their brain immediately starts processing. It's not that they can't handle people. It's that they're handling more of the experience than anyone watching them realizes. And this depth of processing shows up in their work, their relationships, their creativity. Studies show that highly sensitive people with strong sensory processing sensitivity, are disproportionately represented in creative fields. Writing, music, research, design, fields where the goal is to observe the world deeply and translate it into something meaningful. They don't need the stage. They build the stage for other people to stand on. Here's something else worth knowing. This trait tends to be deeply misunderstood by the people who love them. Extroverted partners, parents, friends sometimes interpret the spotlight avoidance as a problem to solve. They push. They volunteer the person for toasts and announcements and performances, thinking they're helping. But what they're actually doing is triggering that social evaluative threat response and then watching someone they love white-knuckle their way through it with a smile. Loving someone who hates the center of attention means learning to celebrate them quietly. It means noticing their contributions without making a production of it. It means understanding that their love language might never involve public declarations. You notice more. You listen better. You make others feel valued in ways that loud personalities rarely manage to. You do the quiet work that holds things together. And you don't need applause to know it mattered. There will always be a culture that rewards visibility, that equates noise with importance and presence with performance. Social media has made it louder. The pressure to be seen, to post, to go live, to announce yourself to the world, it's relentless. And for people wired the way you are, that pressure can feel like a constant low-grade accusation, like something is wrong with you for not wanting it. There isn't. Science says so. The most influential people in history weren't always the loudest ones in the room. They were often the ones in the corner, watching, thinking, building something quietly that eventually the whole world would look at, and then stepping back to let the work speak for itself. If you're someone who steps aside when the cake comes out, who deflects the compliment, who prefers the conversation to the crowd, who does the work without needing the credit, you're not missing something. You're just playing a longer game, one with deeper stakes and quieter wins. And honestly, that might be the most powerful way to live. If this felt like someone finally put words to something you've always known about yourself, you're going to want to watch the next one. Because the psychology of people who feel everything more deeply than others goes even further than what we covered today. Click it. It's going to make a lot of things make sense.